Stitching up a whole entire garment is a lot of work. And I don't know about you, but when I go into a dressing room, I take a whole bunch of items and maybe come out with one of them. So the fact that you can't try on a handmade item until it's almost completely done can be really overwhelming. Hello, and welcome to Blah Blah Black Sheep, a weekly yarny podcast where I, Sarah Korth of SEK Handmade, talk all things yarny. Today, I'm doing an honest pattern review of the Mezzo Cardigan. To start off, I want to say that I purchased this pattern and the yarn all on my own. This is not sponsored by the designer or any yarn company, and everything is my own personal opinion. As a crochet designer and a crochet teacher, though, I feel like I can give you a lot of information and insights to help you decide if this is a pattern you want to make. So let's dive right into my review of the Mezzo Cardigan by Jess Coppom of Make and Do Crew. Before I decided to dive into this pattern, it had been on my favorites list for quite a while. This is not a brand new pattern by any means. But I had lots of students who wanted to do more garments, and I thought that this would be a fun, unique construction for us to dive in together and work on. I also will confess that I was drawn in by the pictures of Jess in the cardigan. She looks really great in it and has styled it super adorably. So I'm going to go ahead and break down the pattern into some pieces and tell you what I used and what I learned, who I think the pattern is best for, and who may want to avoid this pattern. So let's start off with the yarn. The pattern uses Coppom, which is by Lion Brand. It's a DK weight yarn with 232 yards per 100 grams. It is a cotton and bamboo blend. I immediately knew that I was going to choose something different. I have used Coppom in the past and had friends that have used Coppom, and we all kind of agree that we don't love it. While it is a really nice yarn to work with, it comes in some really beautiful colors. The fiber content causes the yarn to be slippery, which can make it a little hard to work with. Some of the colors seem to be more splitty than other colors, harder to work around the plies of the yarn, but you tend to end up splitting the plies a lot. And then to me, the biggest deter of making such a large oversized cardigan in Coppom is that it stretches a lot. I knew that making a larger size in this and making a full length longer cardigan, I would need to use a yarn that bounced back and held its shape a little more. I will say I am very proud of myself for only using yarn from my stash to make this cardigan, but let me tell you how I ended up with the two-toned cardigan. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this cardigan was designed in collaboration with Lion Brand. The reason that I say that is because of how the yarn was listed within the pattern. Often when there's a collaboration between a designer and a yarn brand, they won't list the yarn by yards. They'll list it by balls or skeins of yarn that you need. Not that this is necessarily nefarious, but I think that this is because it encourages people to just look at the balls of yarn they need, go and buy the exact yarn that the pattern was made out of, because that's the route of least resistance. Me not being in love with Coppom yarn and always trying to do things the hard way, went ahead and started looking for yarns within my stash that I could use to make this cardigan. Here's the problem. I went and I found this lovely, lovely gray yarn that, as I said, I had in my stash. I did my comparison and thought, oh my gosh, I have plenty of yarn. But then as I got going, I was like, no, I don't have enough yarn. Here's where the problem happened. Typically, I think in patterns, the amount of yarn that you need is listed by yards. I feel that that's most commonly used because it's the most accurate way to help people find the exact amount of yarn that they need. This pattern, however, listed the yarn you needed in two ways: balls of yarn or grams of yarn needed. So what I had done is I had looked at the grams of yarn that I needed, assumed without looking carefully that it was the yards that I needed, and I did not have enough. really enjoy how my color blocking turned out. When I realized I was going to run out of yarn, I dove back into my stash and found another yarn that I think, while not a perfect match for the weight, as you'll see in a minute when I read you the stats, it did work really well with the yarn that I had, and I really like the pop of color. So let me give you the yarn stats. The gray yarn is Yowza What a Skein from Miss Babs, and it is in the colorway pewter. You cannot get this colorway anymore, though you can buy this yarn base. I know that because I went on their website to see if I could buy more. This is a DK weight yarn, and it is 560 yards to 227 grams. To put that in a more rounded perspective of 100 grams, that is 247 yards per 100 grams. It is a 100% superwash merino yarn. The pink yarn that I used is Alta Truth by Alta Yarns. It is color number 3025. It is also considered a DK weight yarn, and it has 298 yards per 100 grams. So you can see 247 to 298. It's not that close. I feel pretty lucky that it worked out. As I was working with adding the pink yarn, I could definitely see that it was quite a bit lighter weight, but it turned out, let's see if I can show you. There's not a demarcation where the sleeve like cinches in there because this was making smaller stitches. So I really kind of lucked out that it worked out so well. Just a quick little impression of these two yarns. I have to say that I was really excited to work with this yarn from Miss Babs. I've worked with other yarns from Miss Babs. My whole entire flossy shawl is made out of yarns from Miss Babs, and I absolutely loved them. That shawl was made out of 3 different yarn bases from Miss Babs, and I thought they were all fabulous. So we really expected to really love this yarn. And I have to confess, I did not love it. To me, it almost has a cottony quality to it with the feel and the texture of the yarn, and it just wasn't what I was expecting. As a matter of fact, while I worked with this yarn, I had several people ask me if it was a cotton yarn. I do want to put in the disclaimer that while this was not my favorite, it could be different now. I came across this yarn in a very unusual way. I purchased yarn from a woman who was selling off the yarn stash of a friend's mother who had passed away. So this yarn could very well be many, many years old. And while the yarn base is still being sold by Miss Babs, I can't really speak to if this is the same exactly as what they're selling now. Generally speaking, I do really like Miss Babs yarn, and I would definitely work with it again, though I might not pick this base just because I don't know what it would be like. The pink yarn, it is, did I tell you? I don't even know if I told you. It's 80% merino and 20% baby alpaca. I am obsessed with this yarn. It is lovely. This was from my mom's yarn stash, and it was great to work with. I really, really enjoyed it. As I got started, I thought that I might make this cardigan a cropped length and wear it over dresses, but once I started adding the pink to it and I really, really liked it, I decided to make it a full length, kind of on the long side cardigan, because I wanted to use up as much of this pink yarn as I could because I just loved it so much, and it deserved to have as much of it used in this project as possible. All right, let's talk about the hook I used. Friends, you need to gauge swatch. The gauge swatch for this pattern is very simple. You actually start making the base hexagon of the cardigan, and after a certain number of rows, you measure your gauge. So you're starting the pattern with your gauge swatch, which feels like if you feel like gauge swatching is a waste of time, being able to actually have your gauge swatch be the start of your cardigan feels pretty good. I will say I had to gauge swatch a couple times, and I landed with a USH 5mm hook, which is a full millimeter smaller than what the pattern called for. Needing to change my hook to meet gauge is totally normal, and especially when you're doing a full garment, you really want to be sure that you're on gauge so that you don't have any unexpected sizing issues happening. I will say that while I did enjoy that your gauge swatch was the start of the cardigan, I did find it to be an issue. And I have to say, I taught this pattern as a class, and so I made my own, and I guided 8 students through making their pattern too. And so I learned a whole lot about this pattern, not just from my perspective, but from other people's perspective too. One of the problems that I found with this cardigan, and I think this can be a bit of an issue with many patterns, so it's just something to be aware of as you're working a pattern. The hexagon that you start working with is made up of all double crochets, but this gorgeous texture comes in a few rows later, and you end up working, I would say, the majority of the cardigan in this lovely puff stitch pattern. You don't, however, ever measure your gauge with the puff stitches. I found that while my double crochet gauge was spot on, my puff stitch gauge was way off. And because of that, I think I used up my yarn a lot faster than I would have. And I had to adjust my sizing in some kind of unexpected ways to get the cardigan that would best fit me. I want to share with you what other supplies you need. It's pretty limited because this is a cardigan. You mostly just need your yarn and the hook. Of course, you're going to want a tapestry needle to weave in your ends, and you're probably going to want wool wash and a place to lay it out and block it. It is a cardigan, which is a sweater, which means you're going to wear it on your body and potentially spill things on it and get sweaty and stuff in it. So you need to be prepared to wash your cardigan in some way. The other main kind of unusual notion that you need for this is you need some way to denote all 6 sides of your hexagon as you work them. This is super key to the pattern, so do not think that you can skip over this step. Jess has really thought through this process and gives you a really easy, helpful tool to label the sides of your cardigan. But the tool that she gives you are these rectangles of paper that you use a stitch marker to attach to each side of your hexagon. I saw those and I immediately thought, 1, what a great way to provide this tool for people. 2, that would never work for me. It would drive me crazy. I'd probably paper cut myself. I'm not using those. So my students and I tackled this in a couple different ways. Some of my students had or purchased numbered stitch markers. This does not have to be anything fancy, though you can go out and buy some pretty awesome numbered stitch markers. You could also just buy some inexpensive beads that have numbers on them, slip them on one of those little tiny bulb stitch markers and use that. I had some stitch markers that were numbered and some stitch markers that weren't, and so I used a mix of numbering my sides and identifying my sides. Lots of my students used the identifying the sides technique. All that is that they took unique stitch markers. So some of them had rainbow stitch markers. I don't know why that needed a circle. Rainbow stitch markers. And they said that red was going to be side 1, orange was going to be side 2, yellow was going to be side 3, green, and so on. So all they did was they noted down which stitch markers equaled which side, and then they labeled their sides with stitch markers they already had. And some people didn't even use stitch markers that went together. There was one lady that was pink bear is side 1, green star is side 2. So as long as you keep a log of what equals what, you can do this without purchasing anything new or using the more, in my opinion, clunky pieces of paper that she provides. I do want to restate one more time, you do need your sides numbered. It is critical to the pattern, so be sure you number your sides and keep them numbered until you're almost done. All right, let's talk skill level. I think skill level is something that is very self-determined. So I'm not going to tell you if you know these 3 stitches, you can absolutely do this pattern. The thing with such a large and unique pattern is it's really up to your level of how much you want to learn and how much challenge you want to tackle. I would say an enthusiastic, rightly motivated, adventurous beginner could absolutely do this pattern. There are no stitches that are like wild and crazy. I would say if you know your basic stitches, the only thing you'd need to add on is a puff stitch and a yarn over slip stitch, and both of those are totally things that you could tackle. If you've worked some of my patterns, I call the yarn over slip stitch the ring stitch. It's the same thing, and so maybe you've already tackled it in one of my patterns. Who knows? The biggest challenge to this pattern, I think, is the unique construction. You work a hexagon, which looks like it should in no way possibly make a cardigan, and then you turn it into a cardigan. I spent quite a bit of time reading ahead in the pattern, and while it is good to read through a pattern just to get a feel for the pattern ahead of time, I found that reading too far ahead as I was working on the pattern only created anxiety. Until I had done the steps before, I couldn't picture how those next steps worked, and so I would get all worked up that this was going to be hard, I was going to hit a point where I wouldn't know what I was doing. But once I did the steps beforehand, read the instructions, and just did what they said, for the most part, it was pretty straightforward and ended up making sense. So this is very much a trust the process kind of pattern. So who is this pattern not for? Let's be honest, even the most amazing patterns are not for everyone. And so again, while this is something you have to determine for yourself, I just want to share with you a few things to consider that might make this pattern not exactly the thing you'd like to tackle. First of all, as I said, this is not a pattern for someone who is overwhelmed easily. If you have never made a garment before, this unique construction can easily overwhelm your brain and give you anxiety about, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Can I do this? Can't I do this? So if you are looking for a super chill and relaxing make, I would not recommend this pattern. Also, if you have no garment experience, I don't know that this would be the first garment I would recommend because of that unique construction and a lot of the pieces and folding and changing and turning and numbering and all of that. I just don't think it would be the thing I would most recommend as a very first cardigan project for you. The other type of person that I would not recommend this pattern for is for someone who really likes to customize fit. This was a big problem that I had with the pattern. And while I have ended up enjoying the end results, I can already tell that this is not going to be my most favorite garment I've ever made, and here's why. When you work a hexagon, I want you to think of it like a granny square. It's like a granny square, but with more sides. So when you work, you're working around all sides all the time. And because of the way that the hexagon cardigan pattern and any hexagon cardigan pattern is worked, you expand in all directions at once because you work around all those sides all the time. So you are expanding the width of your body, the height of it, the depth of your sleeve, all at the same time. That makes customizing your fit really, really hard. For me, what happened is I ended up with a very big arm circumference and not enough circumference to cover my chest. While this pattern does include some extensions to help cover that distance, overall, 100% all of my students and myself found that this was going to be, no matter which way we cut it, a very oversized pattern. Lots of positive ease, and it was really hard to avoid that. So if you're someone who really likes a customizable fit or a fit that fits your body a little closer, I don't think that this is probably the pattern for you. All right, let's talk tips and modifications. You guys, I made so many modifications. And this wasn't all just due to the pattern and its construction. It was also partly to do with the fact that I was running out of yarn. I knew for sure that I wanted the main body of my cardigan, all of the puff stitches, to be in just my gray yarn. I did not want to start adding more colors to the hexagon. I also found, as I stated previously, that my sizing was quite a bit off because there hadn't been any gauge swatching of the puff stitches. I ended up having to kind of create my own size because of this. Now, because of my experience with crochet and garments, I didn't have a lot of trouble making modifications like this, but I would again say if this is something you aren't comfortable with, you may have a more challenging time with fit with this pattern. So for my main body, I ended up finishing my hexagon a couple rounds earlier than was suggested for my size because I found that that gave me plenty of length both in my sleeves and the body of my pattern. And then while my size recommended extensions in the front and the back, I only put them in the back because there was no way I was getting front extensions without running out of my gray yarn. One of the things that I really loved about this pattern was that I thought that the hexagon was very thoughtfully placed. The seam of your hexagon runs down your underarm, which I think is the least obvious place for a seam, and I really like that. So when the designer suggested starting your seam of your arm at the top here and working down, and then working your sleeve extensions with the seam on the top, I did not care for that. So since I was cutting my yarn anyways, and to me this would be worth a couple extra ends to weave in, what I did was instead of continuing my yarn here, which I wouldn't have continued anyways because I was out of the gray. But instead of joining my yarn here and having the seam of this sleeve extension on the top of my arm, I simply just joined where my seam was here at the bottom. And now my joining seam runs all the way down the bottom of my sleeve. And now the top of my sleeve is just a nice uniform fabric. I really think the purpose of that was to avoid weaving in some ends, but again, I would rather weave in some ends and have a more flawless look than to avoid weaving in a couple ends. Another modification that I made, this time out of personal preference completely, is that I changed the amount of decreases in the sleeve. So you get to the bottom of your sleeve and you work decreases to bring the sleeve into your cuff. When I worked the decreases as specified by the pattern, I still had probably 4 inches of fabric that draped from my sleeve. I knew that to make the sleeves look the best on me, I really wanted to accentuate the smallest part of my body, my wrist. And so I wanted that to be a pretty fitted fit. Fitted fit. So I just added extra decreases before I added my cuff, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. It makes the ballooning of the sleeve really nice, and I think it makes the whole thing more flattering because it accentuates the smaller part of my body. You can tell just by looking at a picture of the pattern that another thing that I've changed is the ribbing. I went just really simple with a single crochet back loop only applied ribbing. It's a favorite of mine. I like the look. I wanted all of my ribbings to match my sleeves around the front and the bottom of my cardigan. And so I knew that I was going to be making adjustments here because of how it was fitting me. And so I wanted an easy stitch that I was really familiar with to make those adjustments. So the pattern calls for a pretty narrow border around the edge. And you can see that if I had just added a small border to my gray, I would not have covered up my whole body. So I knew I needed a thick ribbing around the inside of my cardigan to give me more distance across my chest. So what I ended up doing was I ended up doing that single crochet in the back loop, only applied ribbing throughout the whole cardigan. I should say the sleeves are a great place to make adjustments. Let's be honest, everybody's arm length is different and there's no reason for you to follow the pattern exactly when modifying the sleeves is just so simple. So the pattern does specify the number of rows of double crochet you should finish your sleeve with. Here's what I found for customizing the length of the sleeve. You want to work the sleeve about to the length you want your cuff to end at, and then do your decreases and add your cuff. Here is why. The sleeve only balloons because there is extra fabric to hang down over the cuff. So if you make your sleeve, let's see if I can show you. If you make your sleeve only as long as you want it to be and you don't have that extra fabric, it doesn't create the same look of the balloon over the cuff, which I think is really key to the whole vibe of this cardigan. Then what I did was I noted how many rounds, partly because of my color blocking, I noted how many rounds I had made the sleeve in. I added that many rounds to the bottom of my sweater so that my sleeve and the bottom of my cardigan, it's not completely perfect, but I do like the appearance of about the same number of extra color rows in my sleeves and in the bottom of my cardigan. Then I added my rib border to the bottom of my cardigan and I laid my cardigan flat to see about how much space I needed to cover in between where my gray finished and how wide I wanted my actual cardigan so that I could get some decent coverage. Now, since it's a cardigan, obviously it does, fall open some, but I have made it so that it can come together in the middle if I wanted to. So what I ended up choosing to do was I worked a foundation row around the edge of my cardigan. This made working my applied ribbing so much easier. It was really handy to be able to make sure that that row was flat and looking nice so that I could add my applied ribbing and not have to worry as much about how it was laying. Now, the one part that I did modify, I made this nice wide ribbing and I got about halfway around my neck and I tried my cardigan on and this was really standing up funny around my neck and I didn't like that. So I went back to a little lower than my collarbone. I put in stitch markers from the same distance from the shoulder. And what I did was I started decreasing the number of stitches that I had in my applied ribbing until I just had a couple stitches around the back. And then I increased again. It's given me this really subtle V-neck, and I think it just lays really nicely now around my shoulders and neck. Here's the main thing I would say about modifications. You have the freedom to modify in whatever way you want. You just need to give it a try on your garment as much as you can, and not be afraid to frog back if it doesn't work. For me to figure out that these sleeves needed to be much longer than I thought they would, I had to frog back about 10 times. Did it take some extra time? Yes. But am I thrilled with how my sleeves look now? Absolutely. So for me, totally worth it. The final customization that I did was that after I had finished my applied ribbing all the way around, I thought it would be fun to add a really simple border around everything. So around my wrists and all the way around the cardigan, I started in one corner, I worked up, around, down, all the way around the back. And I added a twisted single crochet border. It's a pretty subtle but really unifying finishing touch that I think just adds a little professionalism to it, and I hope will add some stability since it's a single crochet all the way around the outer edges of my cardigan to help it hold its shape really well. So what is my overall impression of the pattern? After having worked the whole pattern myself and guided a whole class full of students through working the pattern, I would say that this is a really great pattern. It is written incredibly well. There are lots of really detailed instructions that as long as you read them and follow them carefully, you should pretty much be good to go. There's lots of pictures about how the cardigan is constructed, and there are some tutorial videos and a whole set of blog posts about it. So use your resources, and with an adventurous heart and a willingness to not get overwhelmed, I think you could totally make this pattern. Probably one of the things that I liked least about this pattern was that the puff stitch was not included in the gauge. I think you definitely could have had everyone work a certain number of rows of the puff stitch remeasured to see if they were still on gauge. It's such a big part of the overall pattern that people's sizing can really get messed up not knowing what the gauge of the puff stitches is supposed to be. So if I could wave my magic wand and change anything, that's probably the thing I would change. My other major impression is that I personally would really like a pattern that's more customizable. This is nothing knocking this pattern specifically, but just generally speaking, hexagon style garments are just harder to customize. And so if you want a more fitted cardigan, this is not what you're looking for. Hexagon style cardigans or garments are always going to be on the boxy side, and it's just something to be aware of before you dive into this style of pattern. Today I am wearing, obviously, my Mezzo cardigan. Links to the yarns, links to the pattern are all in the show notes below. You don't have to hunt them down. To go with my casual look of my casual cardigan here, I am wearing one of my favorite pairs of earrings from Mandrel Works. Adrienne, the artisan who makes this gorgeous and high quality jewelry, is local to me. She is lovely. I highly recommend that you check out her jewelry and maybe purchase something. I've loved every piece I've purchased from her. Quick announcement, the spring shawl along is still going on. If you haven't noticed, I've been posting an outfit of the day every day all month long. This is in an effort to help you not just make shawls, but also wear them. So I hope you check those out, get some inspiration about what kind of outfits you can wear shawls with, and some styling ideas of how to wear the shawl specifically. I've got a whole bunch of those videos now, and so I'll link the playlist down in the description below so that you can check those out too. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that this video helps you decide if this is the pattern for you. If you found this video helpful, I would love it if you would let me know, because I would love to do more of these videos. Drop a comment below and tell me what you liked. Maybe if there's something else you would have liked to know, ask me any questions. I'm happy to answer them. Also, if you have a garment pattern you've been looking about trying that you'd like me to make and do a review on before you give it a try, drop that in the comments below too. Of course, I'd love it if you'd like, subscribe, share with a friend. Spread the love, join our community. We're so excited to have you here. I'll see you back here again next week. I hope you have an amazing week and happy crafting.